January 12, 1957. Ed Sullivan Theater, New York City. Backstage, 23 people stood in a green room that smelled like coffee and stage makeup. Giuseppe Mauretti, the Metropolitan Opera's most celebrated tenor, was explaining to anyone who'd listen why Elvis Presley wasn't a real singer. "He shouts, he moans, he gyrates," Mauretti said, his Italian accent thick with contempt. "But technique, control, actual vocal mastery? He has none of these things." Elvis, standing 10 feet away adjusting his tie, heard every word. Everyone expected him to ignore it, to walk away like he'd done a dozen times before. But then Mauretti laughed, a loud theatrical laugh, and said something that crossed a line. What Elvis did next didn't just silence Mauretti. It made him apologize on his knees. The room went cold. Not literally, though January in New York was bitter enough. Cold in the way rooms get when something uncomfortable has been said out loud, when everyone knows a line has been crossed but nobody knows what happens next. Ray Bloch, Ed Sullivan's musical director, set down his clipboard. He'd been in show business for 30 years and could sense when a situation was about to explode. This was one of those moments. Ed Sullivan himself, usually unflappable, looked up from the script he'd been reviewing. His stage manager, a woman named Dorothy Carson who'd worked every major variety show in New York, took a step closer. Not to intervene, not yet, but to be ready in case things got ugly. Because Giuseppe Mauretti had just made a critical mistake. He'd called Elvis's mother's singing caterwauling. Elvis's hands, which had been working on his tie, stopped moving. His jaw tightened. For 3 seconds he stood completely still, and everyone who knew him recognized that stillness as dangerous. Not violent dangerous. Elvis didn't throw punches. But dangerous in the way that precedes someone doing something they can't take back. Giuseppe Mauretti was 53 years old, at the peak of his career, and convinced of his own superiority. He'd sung at La Scala, at the Vienna State Opera, at every major opera house in Europe. He'd performed for kings and presidents. His technique was flawless, his voice powerful and controlled, his understanding of classical vocal pedagogy unmatched. And he was absolutely certain that rock and roll was garbage performed by talentless hacks. The meeting hadn't been planned, which made the confrontation more volatile. Mauretti was scheduled to appear on Ed Sullivan's show that night, performing an aria from Tosca. Big cultural moment, bringing opera to the masses on Sunday night television. Ed Sullivan loved these moments, mixing high culture with popular entertainment, giving his audience variety. Elvis was also performing that night. Third appearance on the show, and by now he was the biggest phenomenon in American music. His first 2 Sullivan appearances had drawn record ratings, and Ed wanted him back. The problem was scheduling. They were both using the same backstage area for different reasons at the same time. Mauretti had arrived early to warm up his voice. Elvis came in to go over technical details with the crew. And Mauretti, who'd been drinking espresso and holding court with some of the classical musicians in the orchestra, had started pontificating about the decline of musical standards in America. "Look at what passes for singing now," he'd said, gesturing broadly. "These rock and roll boys, they can't read music. They don't understand breath support. They wouldn't last 30 seconds in a real vocal performance. They're popular, yes, but popular is not the same as good." Someone had mentioned Elvis specifically. "Ah yes, the Presley boy," Mauretti had said, and his tone was dripping with condescension. "Handsome, I'll give him that. The girls scream for him. But can he sing? Really sing? With proper technique, proper control, proper understanding of what the voice can actually do?" Ray Bloch had tried to redirect the conversation. "Elvis has a very interesting voice," he'd said diplomatically. "Unique range, good instincts." Instincts, Mauretti had laughed. Instincts are what animals have. Singers have training. They have discipline. They study for years to understand their instrument. He'd paused, then added, "My teacher in Milan used to say that American popular singers sound like they learned to sing from their mothers in the kitchen. And I think he was right. Kitchen singing. Caterwauling while washing dishes. That's when Elvis's hands stopped moving. Because Elvis had learned to sing from his mother. In their tiny house in Tupelo, Then in Memphis, Gladys Presley had sung to him constantly. Gospel songs, old ballads, hymns from church. She had a beautiful voice, untrained but pure, and everything Elvis knew about making music means something came from listening to her. Calling her voice caterwauling wasn't just insulting Elvis's technique. It was insulting his mother, his childhood, the source of everything that mattered to him about music. The room recognized the shift in Elvis's energy immediately. His bass player, Bill Black, who'd been sitting on an equipment case, stood up. Not aggressive, just alert, ready to back Elvis up if needed. Scotty Moore, guitar player, moved slightly closer. Even the stage crew, union guys who'd seen every kind of backstage drama, paid attention. Something was about to happen. Elvis turned slowly to face Murray. His expression was calm, controlled, but his eyes had gone cold. "Say that again," he said quietly. Murray, oblivious to the danger, smiled. "I said that American popular singers learned from their mothers. Kitchen singing. It's not an insult, it's an observation. You sing from instinct, not training. There's a difference." "You think I can't really sing?" Elvis said. "Not a question, a statement." "I think you sing rock and roll very effectively," Murray replied, his tone patronizing. "For what it is. But real singing?
Classical technique?
That requires years of training, understanding of proper breath support, resonance, vocal placement. These are not things one learns from instinct." Elvis nodded slowly. "What would it take to prove you wrong?" Murray laughed again, that same theatrical laugh. "Nothing could prove me wrong, my boy. I spent 30 years studying the voice. I know what I'm talking about." "Humor me," Elvis said, and there was steel in his voice now. "What would I have to do to show you that I can really sing?" Murray thought about it, and you could see in his face that he was enjoying this. The chance to embarrass this rock and roll upstart in front of professionals, to prove his point about training versus instinct. "Sing something that requires actual technique," he said. "Not rock and roll, not gospel, not country. Sing something classical. Something that exposes every flaw in your training, or lack thereof." "Pick the song," Elvis said. The room went silent. Ed Sullivan stepped forward. "Elvis, you don't have to." "Pick the song," Elvis repeated, looking directly at Murray. Murray's smile grew wider. This was exactly what he wanted. "All right," he said. He walked to the piano where Ray Bloch had been working and rifled through some sheet music until he found what he was looking for. "Oh, Sol Mio," he said, holding up the music. "Neapolitan song, 1898. It's been performed by every great tenor for half a century. It requires perfect breath control, clean vowel formation, the ability to sustain high notes with power and beauty. It's not." He paused for effect. "Something one learns in a kitchen." The insult was deliberate and everyone caught it. Elvis walked over and took the sheet music. He looked at it for a moment, and Ray Bloch, standing close enough to see his face, later said that Elvis's expression never changed. No fear, no doubt, just focus. "You know this song?" Murray asked, and his tone suggested he knew the answer would be no. "I know it," Elvis said quietly. He did know it. Not from formal training, but from listening. From hours spent in Memphis record stores listening to old 78s. From late nights with the radio picking up stations that played music from all over the world. Elvis was a student of music in a way that didn't involve classrooms, a way that Murray couldn't understand or respect. "Then sing it," Murray said. "Show us your technique." Elvis looked around the room, at the crew members who'd stopped working to watch, at his band members who knew what he could do but had never seen him attempt something like this, at Ed Sullivan who looked worried, at Ray Bloch who looked curious. Then he looked back at Murray. "I'll need the piano," he said. Ray Bloch moved to the piano immediately. "What key?" he asked. "Original," Elvis said. That got Murray's attention. The original key was high, challenging even for trained tenors. "You're sure?" he asked, and there was a flicker of doubt in his voice now. "I'm sure," Elvis said. He handed the sheet music back to Murray. "I don't need it," he said. "I know the words." The room held its breath. Elvis walked to the center of the space, not near the piano but out in the open where everyone could see him clearly. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, something had changed. The rock and roll performer was gone. What stood there now was someone older, more serious, completely focused. Ray Bloch played the introduction, classical piano, elegant and simple. The melody was beautiful, soaring, romantic. The kind of song that had made audiences weep for decades. Elvis took a breath, and when he opened his mouth to sing, the sound that came out stopped time. It wasn't his rock and roll voice. It wasn't the hip-shaking, energetic performer that teenage girls screamed for. This was something else entirely. Pure, controlled, technically perfect classical singing. The first phrase was in Italian, and his pronunciation was flawless. Not American accented, but true Italian vowels, the kind that comes from careful listening and natural ear. His tone was warm, resonant, supported by breath control that would have impressed any vocal coach. Murady's smile vanished. The second phrase built in intensity, and Elvis's voice opened up, revealing power that had been hidden under his rock and roll performances. He had a natural tenor voice, bright and clear, with a quality that cut through the air without seeming to push. His breath support was perfect. Each phrase was properly supported from the diaphragm. No strain in the throat, no tension in the jaw. These were technical details that only trained singers would notice, but everyone in that room could hear that something extraordinary was happening. The melody climbed higher, and Elvis went with it effortlessly. No strain, no reaching, just pure vocal production. He hit a high A that rang out like a bell, sustained it for 4 seconds with perfect control, then brought it back down through a descending passage that showed his range and agility. Dorothy Carson, the stage manager, had tears running down her face. Ed Sullivan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Bill Black looked at Scotty Moore and mouthed, "Holy shit!" But the most dramatic reaction was Giuseppe Murady's. His face had gone pale. He'd moved closer without seeming to realize it, drawn by what he was hearing. His hands, which had been casually in his pockets, were now gripping the back of a chair. His expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like shame, because what he was hearing was genuine classical technique combined with natural artistry. Elvis wasn't just hitting the notes correctly. He was interpreting them, bringing emotional depth to a song that could easily become saccharine. He was making artistic choices that showed deep understanding of the music. The song built to its climax, and Elvis held nothing back. His voice soared, filling the room with sound that was both powerful and beautiful. The high notes that Murady had expected him to fail on, Elvis nailed with a purity that made them seem easy. The final phrase came, and Elvis brought the song home with a softness that was somehow more impressive than the power. He diminished the volume without losing intensity, showing dynamic control that takes years to master. The last word faded into silence, and he held the final note with a vibrato that was subtle, natural, perfectly controlled. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence that lasted 5 full seconds. Elvis opened his eyes and looked at Murady. Murady was staring at him with an expression that was difficult to read. Shock, certainly, but also something else. Recognition. The look one master gives another when they realize they've been wrong. Ed Sullivan started clapping, breaking the spell. The rest of the room joined in immediately. Applause that was genuine and enthusiastic, the kind that happens when people witness something unexpected and extraordinary. But Elvis wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Murady, waiting. Murady walked forward slowly. He stopped directly in front of Elvis, and for a moment, nobody knew what he would say or do. Then he did something that shocked everyone more than Elvis's performance had. He dropped to one knee. It was a gesture from opera, from old European tradition, the acknowledgement of a master by a student or of one artist by another. He took Elvis's hand and pressed it to his forehead. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong." Elvis looked down at him, and the anger that had been in his eyes earlier was gone. "Get up," he said quietly. "Please." Murady stood, but he didn't let go of Elvis's hand. Where did you learn to sing like that? He asked. My mother, Elvis said simply. And church, and listening, and caring about the music more than showing off. That last phrase hit Murray like a punch. He nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I can hear that. I can hear all of that. He paused, collecting himself. I have spent 30 years studying technique, he said. And I forgot that technique without soul is just exercise. You have both. Technique that I didn't expect, and soul that I could never teach. The room was still silent, everyone watching this moment of transformation. I insulted your mother, Murray continued. I insulted your art. I insulted you. I did this because I am old and arrogant and afraid. Afraid of what? Elvis asked. Afraid that music is changing, Murray said. Afraid that what I spent my life mastering doesn't matter anymore. Afraid that young people like you will make everything I know irrelevant. He smiled sadly. But fear is no excuse for cruelty. I am sorry. Elvis shook his head. You're not irrelevant, he said. What you do, it's important. It's beautiful. It's just different from what I do. Music is big enough for both of us. Murray looked at him for a long moment, then pulled him into a hug. It was awkward, this formal European opera singer embracing a young rock and roll star, but it was genuine. When they separated, Murray wiped his eyes. You have a gift, he said. A real gift. Promise me you won't waste it. I'll try not to, Elvis said. Ray Block, who'd been sitting quietly at the piano, spoke up. For the record, he said, that was one of the most beautiful performances of that song I've ever heard, and I've heard it performed by some of the greatest tenors in the world. Ed Sullivan nodded. We need to get that on the show, he said. Elvis, would you consider performing that tonight? Instead of or in addition to your rock and roll numbers? Elvis shook his head. That's not what your audience wants from me, he said. They want to see me sing rock and roll and move around. That's fine. That's what I should give them. But you can do both, Ed insisted. I can, Elvis agreed. But I don't need to prove it to anyone anymore. He looked at Murray. Except maybe to one person. And I already did that. The show that night went as planned. Murray performed his aria from Tosca, and it was magnificent. Elvis performed his rock and roll numbers, and the audience went wild. Two completely different types of performance, both excellent in their own way. But backstage something had changed. After the show, Murray found Elvis in his dressing room. He had a piece of paper in his hand, folded carefully. I wrote something for you, he said. About technique. About what I heard today. About what makes a voice truly great. Elvis took the paper. It was covered in Italian script, musical notation, notes about breath support and vowel formation and resonance. Technical details that Murray had spent a lifetime learning. This is generous, Elvis said. It's selfish, Murray corrected. I want your voice to last. I want you to sing for many years. These notes, they will help you protect your instrument. Elvis looked at the paper, then at Murray. Thank you, he said. Really, thank you. They shook hands, and this time it was between equals. No condescension, no hierarchy, just mutual respect between two artists who'd found common ground. The story spread through New York's music community like wildfire. Musicians who'd been there told other musicians, who told others, until everyone had heard about the day Elvis Presley made an opera singer drop to his knees in apology. But the story changed as it spread. Some versions had Elvis hitting impossible notes. Some had Murray actually crying. Some embellished the confrontation into something more dramatic than it was. The truth was dramatic enough. A classically trained opera singer, at the peak of his career, had dismissed Elvis Presley as a talentless hack. And Elvis had responded not with arguments or anger, but with a performance that proved beyond doubt that he could sing, really sing, with technical mastery and emotional depth that demanded respect. Murray told the story himself in interviews later in life. In 1972, doing an interview with a classical music magazine, he brought it up unprompted. The greatest lesson of my career, he said, came from Elvis Presley. He taught me that technique means nothing without artistry, that training means nothing without soul, and that respect between musicians transcends genre and style. I insulted him out of fear and ignorance. He responded with grace and brilliance. I will never forget that moment. The paper he'd given Elvis, the one with technical notes, Elvis kept it his whole life. It was found in his personal effects after he died, carefully preserved in a folder with other meaningful documents. Ray Bloch mentioned the incident in his memoir, published in 1968. In all my years in music, he wrote, I never witnessed a more powerful demonstration of natural talent meeting technical mastery. Elvis proved that day that he was a real singer by any definition, any standard. The fact that he chose to use his voice for rock and roll instead of opera was a choice, not a limitation. The incident changed how some in the classical music world viewed Elvis. Not all of them, certainly. Many continued to dismiss rock and roll as beneath serious consideration. But those who'd heard the story, especially from Murray himself, understood that Elvis was more than his image suggested. It also changed Elvis's own understanding of his abilities. He'd always known he could sing, but having that validated by someone from the classical world gave him a different kind of confidence. He still chose to focus on rock and roll, still gave audiences the performances they wanted, but he knew in a deeper way that his choices were artistic decisions, not limitations. In 1977, months before Elvis died, Murray did an interview with an Italian newspaper. The reporter asked about regrets in his long career. Only one, Murray said, that I judged a young artist before I truly heard him. I let prejudice and fear guide me instead of openness and curiosity. I could have learned from Elvis Presley much earlier if I'd been willing to listen. That's my great regret, that I wasted time on superiority when I could have spent it on understanding. The lesson extends beyond music, beyond that moment in a New York green room. It's about the danger of judging people based on genre, on style, on surface appearances. About assuming that because something is popular, it must be shallow. About letting fear of change make us cruel to things we don't understand. Murray was afraid that rock and roll would make opera irrelevant. That fear made him mean, made him dismissive, made him insult something he hadn't taken time to truly hear. Elvis could have responded with anger, with his own dismissiveness, by writing off classical music as pretentious and stuffy. But he didn't. He accepted the challenge and proved his point through excellence, not argument. And then, having proved his point, he didn't gloat. He didn't humiliate Murray further. He accepted the apology with grace and even defended the value of what Murray did. That's what separated Elvis from just another talented singer. That grace, that understanding that there was room in the world for many kinds of music, that respect didn't diminish him. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who thought they knew what you were capable of without really knowing you? Someone who judged you based on stereotypes or assumptions or fear? How did you respond? With anger or with the kind of grace Elvis showed? It's harder to respond with grace, isn't it? When someone insults something you love, something tied to your identity, every instinct says to fight back, to make them hurt the way they hurt you. But what Elvis showed that day is that there's more power in proving them wrong through excellence than through anger. More dignity in letting your work speak than in defending yourself with words. If the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been dismissed or underestimated. Someone who needs to be reminded that the best response to judgment is undeniable quality. Drop a comment about a time when you proved someone wrong not through argument but through showing them what you could do. Tell me about the moment when your work spoke louder than their assumptions. And if you want more stories about the moments when artists transcended boundaries and proved that excellence recognizes excellence regardless of genre, subscribe and turn on notifications. These stories matter because they remind us that respect, real respect, comes from openness and humility, not from defending our little corners of the world. Because somewhere right now, someone is being judged unfairly. Someone is being dismissed based on style rather than substance. Someone is facing their own Giuseppe Murray. And they need to know what Elvis knew. That the best response to mockery is mastery. That grace under fire is more powerful than anger. that proving your worth through undeniable excellence changes minds in ways argument never could.